website Live and Invest Overseas. It's pretty good about being an expat.
Pardon?
Live and Invest Overseas. The website's pretty good about being an expat. Actually, it's got a lot of good information.
Live overseas. Yeah, I should. Look.
I'll put it in the chat.
Oh, good. Great. Thank you. I appreciate it.
I think we're ready, JP, if you are.
All right, let me set this to speaker view and mute the room. We need to mute the room in case we do get a Zoom bomber, though I think we know everybody in the room today, but you know. Okay, Mark, you want to take it away?
I shall. Welcome everybody to Lit Balm. Today we have the unbelievable talents of Julie Metz, memoirist, Ian Seed, poet, Sufiya Abdur-Rahman, a memoirist, and Clifford Garstang, a novelist fiction writer. Welcome everybody to this new episode of Lit Balm. And I will head off our show with some words of wisdom from our co-host Jonathan Penton, who founded Unlikely Stories, an electronic journal of literature and art, in 1998. He's lent his editorial and management assistance to many literary ventures, including Mad Hat, New Orleans Poetry Festival, Rigorous, and Big Bridge. In 2005, he founded Unlikely Books, which publishes 3 to 5 books of poetry a year. He's organized literary performances and performed himself across the United States. His own poetry books are Last Chap, Blood and Salsa and Painting Rust, Prosthetic Gods, and Standards of Sadity, and the free e-chap book Backstories, which you can download from Argotist ebooks. What are we listening to today, JP?
Wow, words of wisdom. I might be in trouble here. I do have a poem here, but first I do need to say I'm waiting on a package, and I'm the only one here. So if the doorbell rings, I will just leave, and that will be terribly rude, and that will be that. So what I do most weeks is, since I'm not very prolific, I tend to read something that appears on the website unlikelystories.org. That's something that we published in the past couple of weeks. And this poem is called Attack. It's by Wayne F. Burke. Having shortness of breath and chest pain, I thought heart attack. But no, only arterial heart disease. Same as killed my father at 33. High blood pressure and stroke. He collapsed in a grand mal seizure as I played on the stairs with my army men. I remember his red and white checkered bathrobe and Gramp standing, silhouette in the bathroom window, and a man wearing shiny shoes and carrying a black bag, stepping over my soldiers who looked up to me, awaiting the order to attack the hillside. Again, that was Attack by Wayne F. Burke. All right, it's my great pleasure to introduce our co-host, Cassandra Atherton. Cassandra is an award-winning writer, scholar of prose poetry, and professor of writing and literature in Melbourne, Australia. Her most recent books of prose poetry are Pre-Raphaelite, Leftovers, and Fugitive Letters. She is currently writing a book of prose poetry on the atomic bomb with funding from the Australia Council. Cassandra co-wrote Prose Poetry, an Introduction, and the Anthology of Australian Prose Poetry. She is commissioning editor for Westerly Magazine. Cassandra, will you read something for us today?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Jonathan. So here's just a short prose poem for today. In the brief caesura between breaths, my head floods peach, a decanting of orange behind closed lids. Our sweat mingles in walls on your chest hair, and I swim beneath you, legs slipping up around your waist, urging you deeper into me. The afternoon presses on us, a double fermata of covetousness and dreaming. You push back my hair from my face, but I'm never sure what you are looking for. I would like to introduce Mark Vincennes, and know that it's something that everyone enjoys every week. So please join in. Mark Vincennes is an Anglo-Swiss American poet, a fiction writer, translator, editor, publisher, designer, multi-genre artist, and musician. He's published 16 books of poetry, including more recently, Leaning into the Infinite, The Syndicate of Water and Light, Here Comes the Night Dust, Einstein Fledermaus, and The Little Book of Earthly Delights. Vincenz's newest collection, the very beautiful and very amazing A Brief Conversation with Consciousness, is forthcoming this fall from Unlikely Books. An album of music, ambience and verse, left-hand clapping, is forthcoming from Tree Torn Records. Vincenz is also a prolific translator. He's translated from the German, Romanian, and French. He's published 10 books of translations, most recently Unexpected Development by award-winning Swiss poet and novelist Klaus Merz with White Pine in 2018, and it was a finalist for the 2016, I hear you, Cliff Becker Book Prize in Translation. His translation of Klaus Merz's selected poems in Audible Blue is forthcoming from White Pine Press. Vincenz is editor and publisher of Stella Mad Hat Press and publisher of New American Writing. He has lived, here we go with the famous bit, all over the world, from Brazil to China to Iceland to India. He was born in Matilda Hospital on the Peak in Hong Kong, but he now lives on a farm in rural western Massachusetts overlooking Herman Melville's Greylock Mountain, and where, are you ready for the line? There are more puffballs, chicken of the woods, and witch's butter than people. Mark, please read for us. What is a puffball?
It's a mushroom.
Oh, okay. Is it a poisonous one, or is it? Can I?
No, the puffball's edible, actually. At least you have to catch it before it spawns. But the chicken of the wood is absolutely edible. But the witch's butter, I would sort of. You can eat it, you won't die, but it apparently tastes like slime.
Wow. Well, it's very kind of Macbethian witch of you this week.
Well, I thought I'd go, wing of bat, tail of newt sort of thing, This poem is called Dissonance, and it comes from the collection I've been working on called The King of Prussia is Drunk on Stars, or Franz Libowitz is Dead. And here we have Dissonance. Unfurled, who knows where to? Shall we lead them away? Some things are better left unsaid, you said, imbibing a strange drink green and with a maraschino. With the fish shoaled to join him, you said, they'll flock to those Lazarus eyes and that which is concealed small in the lattice of that oh so human skull. Your silence smothered much of my talk, syllable by syllable. It was like blood and part of the sacrificial ritual. Through the trough we went, O Lord. One shall not be led astray. Let every mouth stand open and empty. Let a word like this enter and swing free like a pendulum. I shall dig myself toward you, they say. We shall make untruths truths, they say. Let a dying moth fly to her flame, they say. Do you hear the digging, the dredging, the logging, the extinct languages? Picture one of these languages in all of its coarseness. Picture a whistle that can be a word that can be a story. And now I am delighted to introduce our featured guests today. First off, we will be hearing from Ian Seed, whose collections of poetry and prose poetry include The Underground Cabinet, from Shearsman, Operations of Water, Knives, Forks and Spoons Press, and New York Hotel from Shearsman, which was a TLS Book of the Year. The Thief of Talent, the first translation into English of Pierre Redfie's hybrid novel Le Voleur de Talent, was published by Wakefield Press in 2016. Ian's translation of Max Jacob's groundbreaking collection of prose poems, The Dice Cup, is due to be published by Wakefield in 2023. I'm much looking forward to reading that. Most recently, he has a chapbook out called I Remember from Red Ceilings Press. Welcome, Ian.
Thank you for that, Mark. Thank you very much. Yeah, I'm hoping that the Max Jacob might even be out before 2023, actually, since I finished it before I was meant to, which was good. Because as I said before, he just took over me and I couldn't stop once I'd started. So I'm just going to read prose poems this evening and focus on those. And thank you, by the way, Cassandra, for organizing this and for inviting me to read as well. Thank you, everybody. So I'm going to start off with a prose poem called Insect, which was my very first prose poem, which I actually wrote 40 years ago. And I wrote a few prose poems around that time and then stopped for over 20 years. before coming back, of course. Insect. Walking by the council houses in the falling snow, I thought I saw someone waving to me from a downstairs window. Yet, when I got close enough to press my face against the frosty glass, I realized I'd been mistaken. There was only a family watching television. Looking more closely still, however, I saw myself walking on the screen. The youngest daughter was crying because the way I dragged my crushed leg behind me reminded her of an insect. So eat your heart out, Franz Kafka. Okay. So I read now something from The Underground Cabaret, just one prose poem. And I should explain, I lived for quite a while in Italy, including a spell in Turin where I worked as a high school teacher of English. The unseen every day. For the first time, I was going to be late at the school in Turin, where I taught English as a foreign language. The city looked different this morning. The streets and squares were bathed in a beautiful, yet somehow ominous golden glow, which had so distracted me that I was now lost. I was standing in front of a bookshop I'd never seen before. There were books of philosophy with ancient lettering in the window. A hunched old man with rimless spectacles was just unlocking the door. And even though by now I should have already been with my students, I couldn't resist his invitation to step inside. Books in different languages lay on shelves that seemed to stretch into the distance. I wandered along them until I found myself alone in semi-darkness, where a chance reach brought me a book entitled The Unseen Every Day. Even before opening its heavy covers, I sensed that here was a text which would finally illuminate my understanding of the life beyond life, and yet within the life itself that I led, although it would never enable me to find my way around the city or to arrive on time. So staying in Italy, just read three very short prose poems. My book Makers of Empty Dreams, which is my book that I feel closest to out of all my different books. Town centre. A thin youth with tousled hair and a wispy beard was walking from car to car, stuck in the traffic. He tapped on each window and held out his hand for money. One driver, perhaps to show off in front of the woman next to him, jumped out of his car, shouting and shaking his fist. He ran after the beggar all the way up the crowded high street. I thought he would catch him, but the beggar, turning a corner, ducked unseen into an Italian restaurant. I found him sitting at a table there, looking at a menu. The tablecloth was piled high with coins he'd taken from his pockets. He invited me to join him. Youth. And this was a little bit influenced by Italo Svevo. Youth. Three beautiful Italian sisters live next door. They were triplets, and all three were in love with me. Everyone said how lucky I was. But when their father demanded I make a proposal of marriage, I didn't know who to choose. For even when I made love to one of them, even when I held her gaze and our bodies trembled together. I never knew which of the three I was with. In your dreams, Ian, in your dreams. Okay. Needs. I rented a room in an old house owned by an Italian family. They treated me like one of their own. Because one of the daughters was blind, none of the local men would consider her. Her father asked me if I would marry her. He gave me some pretty pebbles she had collected. I put the pebbles into my pocket and took a stroll into town to think the matter over. On a street corner was a blind beggar. He wanted to know what the clinking sound was. I placed one of the pebbles in his palm, caressing it. He asked if he could have the rest of them. That way, the sound of the pebbles rubbing together at night would keep him company when he slept on the street. And since it's November, I'll read something quite melancholy from my book Identity Papers, called November. It was first published in PN Review. November. I was sitting on a park bench, thinking of an old friend, of how I had never embraced him. I hadn't seen him for years, and yet, as I was wondering about him, I saw him pass by in the light rain that had started to fall. He turned and stared as if he could not believe it was really me. He seemed to have hardly changed, while I had aged almost beyond recognition. I got up and ran to take him in my arms, to hold him so close I could stop his eyes from wandering over my face. And the penultimate one, which is from my book New York Hotel, and it's called American in Rome. I guess I think of the narrator here as an American because he's got special permission to stay there. There's the phrase permesso di soggiorno, which is Italian for permission to stay, permission of residence, which you get for 3 months or a year or 5 years or 10 years or whatever. American in Rome. My permesso di soggiorno was due to expire. Since I was no longer married to an Italian woman, would I have permission to stay in Rome after living there for 10 years? I was wondering about this as I watched the new Pope address a small crowd in the piazza. Perhaps if I were granted an audience with him, he could swing the decision in my favor. At the end of the sermon, I raised my hand and stepped forward out of the crowd. Seeing that I was not from those parts, he asked me where I was from and what religion I practiced. I confessed that I was more of a humanist than anything else, although I occasionally attended Quaker meetings. He listened patiently, but couldn't help smiling at the word Quaker. That evening, I found that I had indeed been granted permission to stay and went to a fair to celebrate. As it happened, the Pope was there too, giving his sermon in a large tent. He waved when he saw me and asked if I would like to contribute something to the gathering. Someone handed me a microphone. Without thinking, I burst into Elvis's All Shook Up. Oh, well, bless my soul, what's wrong with me? Everyone turned and stared until the Pope began to clap along and sway from side to side. Soon the whole crowd was clapping in time while I sang. I felt a tap on my shoulder. It was my ex-wife. "You haven't changed much," she shouted. Her eyes were half disapproving, half affectionate. "No, I suppose not," I thought, and wondered if I could ask her to make love to me for old time's sake. And I'll just finish with, I'll just finish with a short one from the Underground Cabaret. In the empty house. In the empty house, we found what looked like a piece of light, unmoving, frozen in the shape of a human being. We were afraid to touch it. It looked cold enough to burn us. What would happen if we could unfreeze it? Would it melt and vanish? Or would it keep its shape, come alive? Could we take it away with us? Would it make any difference to how we lived or loved, one way or another? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ian.
Thank you.
What are you up to at the moment? What's your next project?
Well, I am, since I've just finished, as you were saying before, I've just finished all that, being completely absorbed by my Max Jacob translation. So I am just writing more prose poems, short bits of prose poems. I'm seeing how things coalesce at the moment. I don't always know where I'm going until I've actually got, some work together. And I start
Well, that's a good gathering time is a good time, right?
Yeah, that is the best time in some ways. It is.
Max
I'm
Jacob.
on my nerve. Sorry, Mark.
Max Jacob, tell us a little bit about him. Just a little.
Just a little. I mean, because once I start, I won't stop.
Nationality?
Well, okay, Max Jacob was French, Jewish. He was born in 1879. He went to Paris as a young man.
A prose poet?
1901. I'm sorry.
A prose poet?
He wasn't. Then he wasn't. Then he was more of an artist. He came from the provinces. He came from a place called Quimper in Brittany, and he was an all-rounder. I mean, he later said he was writing prose poems, but he didn't think of him in that way when he was a child. He was also very good at art. He was very good at music. He was bullied at school. He was called a juif because he was Jewish, so he was bullied. He came to Paris as a young man, and he actually had quite a good job as an art critic, but he dropped out of it all and lived a life of poverty, doing quite a series of menial jobs. A chance meeting brought him into contact with Picasso. This is long before Picasso was famous. And he was very impressed by Picasso's painting. This is around 1903, 1904. And he read some of his poetry to Picasso, and Picasso convinced him that, in fact, his true vocation was that of a poet. So, and they lived together. Picasso and Max Jacob lived together. They actually shared the same hotel room. And there was only one bed in the hotel room. So when Max Jacob was out at his day job working in a department store, Picasso had the bed. And when Picasso came, and then when Max Jacob came back, went to bed, then Picasso was working on his paintings, all in the same room.
So do you have a Picasso for the cover of the book?
Yeah, Picasso designed a lot of a lot of Max Jacob's covers. Did a lot of well-known portraits actually of Max Jacob as well. The Dice Cub, which I translated, which is probably the book he's most famous for, was first published in Le Cornet was first published in 1917 at his own expense. And he hesitated for years and years and years before publishing it. I mean, most of the prose poems in there were written between 1903 and 1910. But he was in huge rivalry with Pierre Reverdy, who was his mentee in some ways. And Pierre Reverdy published his own poems in prose in 1950.
And who is probably more known actually than Max, yeah?
Yeah, he was then. And I think Max, because of who he was.
I have read Pierre's work. I have. It's quite good. I enjoy it.
Yeah.
The New
I mean,
York
actually, copy
Review
was-
of Books came out with an edition, I think, recently, right? New York
Yes,
Review.
that's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well,
It's a lot, but anyway, there's a huge rivalry though between the two of them. I mean, there's a stuff. Well, I think one story that's true that at one point, it was 1915, 1916. Pierre Effedy was in Max Jacob's room and took hold of all of. Max Jacob used to keep all his poems in this huge trunk which he kept locked. And one day, Pierre Effedy managed to find the key and opened it, and made a gesture. He's going to throw them all into the fire. And so I hope you have a copy of these. And Max Jacob said, no, I don't, but I have a revolver in my pocket. So, and that's just one of the anecdotes that go around. Of course, Gertrude Stein was around, mixing in those same circles as well. And of course, she published her Tender Buttons in 1914. So there's a huge...
As was Ernest Hemingway, of course, as well. Yeah.
Well, Hemingway was there a little bit later, but I mean, if you look at Max Jacobs as well, his aesthetics, his theories of his poetics, there's some similarity between them and actually those of Ezra Pound, strangely enough. You know, the focus on the image. Max Jacob didn't that much approve of Rimbaud. He thought Rimbaud was just chaos. He thought Baudelaire was just a writer of fables. So, you know, he believed that prose poem was something absolutely special. It was a kind of reality in its own right. And it wasn't a fable. It wasn't just chaos of the senses or anything like that, derangement of the senses. It was something quite unique. It was something which was situated in relationship to other prose poems. It was a bit like a painting that would create its own reality.
Nice.
So.
Well, thank you, Ian. I'm definitely looking forward to getting a copy of that book. When's it coming out exactly?
Well, if I'm lucky, it might even come out next year, so in 2022. But
Okay,
it might be 2020.
Keep us updated. Feel free to post on Lit Balm Facebook as well when it's up and all that sort of thing. Yeah.
I will, Mark. Thank you very much. Thank you.
It's lovely to have you.
Thank you.
Next up, we hear from Julie Metz, who is the author of the 2001 release Eva and Eve, a New York Times best-selling memoir, Perfection, a Barnes & Noble Discover Great New Writers selection. She's written for publications including the New York Times, Salon, Dame, Tablet, Catapult, Glamour, and Mr. Bellier's Neighborhood.com. The essay that inspired Eva and Eve first appeared in the anthologies The Moment, edited by Larry Smith, creator of 6 word memoirs. Julie has been a guest on podcasts including Mums Don't Have Time to Read Books, rubbish, Dear Sugar Radio, co-hosted by Cheryl Street and Steve Armand, and Women of the Hour, hosted by director, actress Lena Dunham. Julie is a fellow of the Yaddo Corporation, the McDowell Colony, and the Virginia Center for the Creative Arts. She's also the winner of a literary death match, the international competitive reading series founded by Adrian Zunga. She Brought a Sword. She lives with her family in New York's Hudson Valley. You can find out more about her writing life at juliemetz.com and on Instagram at juliemetzwriter. Welcome, Julie.
Thank you so much for having me. And it's really a pleasure to be here, my first time at Lit Balm. So today I'm going to just read a little bit from the opening of my most recent book, which is this one called Eva and Eve. And it is the story of how my mother's family escaped from Nazi-occupied Vienna in 1940. I am of a generation who grew up with a lot of silence in the home around the legacy of war. And the book is my attempt to understand that. But I'll just read from the opening as I start to uncover a first mystery about my mother and what actually compelled me to continue working and researching. In old family photos, my mother Eve was a striking young woman, petite and curvy. Her dark hair, styled in voluptuous 1940s waves, large dark eyes, aquiline nose, and expressive full mouth brought to mind several English movie actresses of Hollywood's golden age, Vivian Leigh in particular. By midlife and until her retirement, my mother presented an elegant figure at work, her salt and pepper hair coiled in a bun at her nape, 5'2", in tailored suits and one of her many pairs of polished Ferragamos. She was at home in the most faithful audiences of Carnegie Hall and the Metropolitan Opera or the galleries of the Frick. You could find her test pinching plums in the fruit bins outside Fairway Market on 74th Street and Broadway, sniffing around a funky smelling triple creme cheese at Zabar's, or ordering smoked salmon and sable at Murray's Sturgeon Shop. I'll take 6 Bialys with that and a tub of scallion cream cheese. She was a New Yorker, steely, savvy, thrifty, and pragmatic. During her working years, my mother did it all, but of course no one called it leaning in. She returned home from a full workday to cook meals that were both simple and ambitious. She paid the family bills and prepared the tax forms. She ironed my father's shirts and cotton handkerchiefs. If my brother or I needed money for a school trip, she opened her wallet, if only just a crack. Whether you wanted them or not, she always had opinions, increasingly unwelcome as I passed from childhood into adolescence, into adulthood. It was never easy with us. As a child growing up with my parents and younger brother Simon, named after a grandfather, in our New York City apartment, I loved her and sometimes feared her. Later, as a teenager, I loved and feared and hated her with an intensity that separated us like ripped tendons that even the most skillful surgeon could not repair. We fought almost daily then. Some nights my voice went hoarse from screaming, doors slammed and invisible walls rose up. My childhood friends described my mother as severe, a hard nut, scary, cold. I don't think she consciously wanted to be that way. As a child, she toughened herself in the face of real danger. The sky could fall again at any moment. Be prepared. Don't go soft. As an adult, I tried to love her, but at a distance. By then, I tried to avoid conflict. My mother and I embraced when we saw each other, but without the full abandon we probably both craved. Sometimes when I was with her, my disappointment that we could not seem to find a path to a less freighted love overwhelmed me. Tears would come later when I was safe in my own home. Until the spring of 2005, our emotional lives unfolded in separate worlds. Then, a few months before my mother turned 77, she called me one evening to deliver the news, without fanfare, that she had cancer. I'd never heard of mesothelioma, a slow-growing, always fatal rarity caused by exposure to asbestos. In her case, it was likely the result of having inhaled airborne fibers during an office renovation decades earlier. Fortunately, my father had not been exposed as his office was elsewhere in the building. September 2006 brought a final reckoning as her body continued wasting. This was particularly unsettling because the physical resemblance between us had always been striking. All the women on her side of the family looked alike. During adolescence, I had recoiled from the evidence of my mother's middle age, one that one day might be mine. And now, as I looked at her in bed, I comprehended another possible future that terrified me. Once she had been curvy and buxom, then her weight had dropped to 100 pounds, and now I was afraid to guess. I'll look like that one day, I mused as I sat by her bed, offering her apple juice with a straw. Something will get me, and there I'll be, bones overdraped with skin, just as she is now, the fate of millions that her family had somehow escaped during the war. At times, her wasting was less terrifying, as if she were being gradually liberated from her failing body. When she was awake, she often stared into the distance, as if she were peering through a window at a landscape invisible to us, the living. Her hospice doctor said it was unusual for mesothelioma patients to linger this way. She was willing her body to hold on a little longer. I don't want to go, she said to me one day, but I am ready to go. During this time, my father and I often went to a local restaurant so he could get out of the apartment for a while. For the first time as an adult, I felt useful to him. Over dinners, he told stories I'd never heard before about his Depression-era childhood in Philadelphia, the good times when his family lived in a house in a middle-class Jewish neighborhood, and then the years after 1932, when his father's business failed, the car and the refrigerator were repossessed, and their house was foreclosed upon. The family moved to an apartment over a tap room, accepting food and money from relatives who still had jobs. His most vivid memories were connected to food, or more accurately, a longing for it. As he continued his stories week after week, I could see his childhood and his sometimes food-stricken time as a soldier in Patton's Third Army unfold like a film with a voiceover. No wonder he had fallen in love with my beautiful, intelligent mother, a gifted home cook, the daughter of a late-in-life restaurant manager and pastry chef. One evening on the walk back to his apartment, I'd already started thinking of my childhood home as his rather than theirs. My father pointed up to a bay window that popped out of a corner building on 104th Street in Broadway. "That's where your mother lived when I met her," he said. "That was the living room window right up there." We stopped to look at that window, one I'd walked by many times in my life without knowing its significance. It was a revelation when I first met her parents. Everything was so serene. They were always gentle with each other. My parents weren't like that at all. Your grandfather Julius was quiet, but Anna was much more outgoing, always a laugh and a smile. They had a cat. He didn't like me much, Blackie. What a brute. But the food. He paused his story as if to catch a whiff of a dinner from all those years ago. I loved how he stored the memories of his life and meals he'd eaten. What a cook she was, Anna. Fantastic baker. And they were running the restaurant then. So whenever I showed up, it was always Frank, the future son-in-law, the schnitzel, the strudel. He sighed. I felt appreciated and needed. My mother didn't seem to need me in the place where she was now. Where did she travel during those long hours of sleep? Sometimes I would move up close to her to make sure she was still breathing. The box containing the morphine that her hospice doctor had provided remained unopened in the refrigerator. On a few occasions, I took the box out to read the label, wishing I could rip open its seal and drink the vial down to dull the pain of watching my mother disappear. She never asked for the morphine. One afternoon, as I waited for her to open her eyes, I investigated the blonde wood mid-century dressers my parents referred to as the delicatessen. There were two identical dressers topped with glass-fronted case that I could imagine stocked with an array of lamb chops and trussed chickens, but that were instead packed with photos, books, and curios of unknown origin. Gently, I pulled open my mother's top drawer, admiring again the 1920s jewelry she'd inherited from her mother, who had been young and beautiful during the interwar years in Vienna, half a world away from New York. A small red cardboard box still bearing the label of a jeweler on Vogenweidplatz held a Jewish pendant and another inscribed Evie. Near the jewelry was a soft leather pouch containing a bone-handled fork and spoon that had belonged to my grandfather. In another red cardboard box, I found a tiny compass. I knew that my grandfather had been an avid mountain climber, and these pieces were the surviving souvenirs of his camping gear. Tucked underneath the jewelry were the dull green Third Reich passports my mother had saved from their journey. I had only peeked at them a few times in my life as they exuded a force field of horror. But now I leafed through the pages, looking closely at my grandparents I'd never met. On the last page was an American visa stamped and signed. I picked up a familiar framed wedding photo of my young parents, my father a bit sheepish with his lopsided smile and horn-rimmed glasses, nestled against my beautiful mother. There had been no grand wedding, though my father's family had offered to pay for one, just a simple service in a rabbi's office. My mother's bobbed curls framed her large eyes, the prominent Singer family nose and the painted lips curved upward in the posed smile of a 1940s starlet. She wore one of her expertly home-tailored suits rather than a white dress. I tried to take in the details of her face like a biographer. I knew so little about her young life, only sketchy memories of a lost happy childhood and what had always seemed like improbable stories of her family's escape in 1940. Too late to ask for details now. After the funeral came a new rhythm of tasks in my mother's absence. I saved the sweaters my mother had knitted, so many stitches, and the cashmere cardigans she cared for meticulously, some dating back to the 1960s. I kept the sweater I'd given her for her last birthday, knowing then that it would soon become a keepsake. It still smelled like her favorite perfume, a gust of rose. I packed up a retractable tape measure, a gift from a printing company decades earlier. How like my mother to save such utilitarian analog vestiges from her years of work. I packed up the leather pouch that contained my grandfather's folding fork and spoon, the compass, my mother's jewelry collection of pearls and antique cameos, the necklaces that had belonged to my grandmother Anna. I slipped a twisted ring my mother was wearing when she died on my bare right pointer finger, twirling it around and around as my sister-in-law and I placed folded clothes into black plastic bags. The ring was a comforting presence until the shocked moment when I realized that my finger was naked again. I had lost it. I rummaged frantically in the black bags until, overcome with the futility of the search, I retreated to the back hallway near the service elevator, where I wept over the loss, cursing my carelessness and wishing I had a cigarette, even though I hadn't smoked one in 15 years. It was just a ring, I told myself. I stepped back inside the apartment, hurriedly washed my face with cold water from the kitchen sink, mumbled an unconvincing, "All right," as my dad passed me and asked me how I was doing. Then I returned to work. I found a pebble in the pocket of one of my mother's winter coats, soft and black with a shiny patina that suggested long use as a comfort against worry. I placed it in my own coat pocket. We have that in common, I mused, both of us pebble collectors, though I had piles to her single one. In the back of the drawer where my mother kept her perfume-scented silk slips and nightgown, I found a small book bound in coffee-colored linen. Pasted in the center was a lithograph of two kittens with red and pink ribbon collars. The word "Poesie" was stamped on the linen in faded gold ink. Inside were handwritten notes, all in German, addressed to Ava, or sometimes Evie, with dates from November 28th, 1938 to March 24th, 1940, the day before my mother and her parents left Vienna for the United States. My father came into the room and I held out the book. "Have you ever seen this? Do you know what it is?" He said he'd never seen it before, not once, during all the decades of their marriage. My sister-in-law had studied German and was able to decipher some of the old-fashioned script, messages of love and farewell from childhood friends and older relatives, sometimes accompanied by famous verses from the poet Goethe. One page was filled with girlish drawings of hearts and colorful stickers of children in traditional Austrian costume. "Do not forget me, your loving friend, Sylvie." On one spread from 1939, a girl named Renata had copied the characters from Disney's Three Little Pigs from a movie advertisement in colored pencil. Across the spread, she'd lettered the line, "Who's afraid of the big bad wolf?" There was indeed a terrifying big bad wolf in Vienna by January 12th of 1939. His name was Adolf Eichmann, one of the architects of Adolf Hitler's final solution, which would nearly obliterate European Jewry by the time the Nazis surrendered in 1945. My father looked over my shoulder, voicing what I suspected. Some, perhaps most of the people who had signed this keepsake book, who did not get out of Vienna by October of 1941, when the German government forbade emigration, must have perished. By the time my mother left with her parents, it had been almost too late. Who were all these people? Aunts and uncles, family friends, teachers, other girls who may not have reached adulthood. As I turned the fragile pages, I was saddened but not surprised that my mother had never shared this most private journal with her family. Ava had escaped and lived. She had become Eve. She'd found love, married, worked, created a family. She had become an American. But how had her family gotten out? And had she felt guilt for surviving? The keepsake book sat on my desk, its aging paper fragrant, exuding a force that pulled me back to a past my mother had tried to forget. Now I had other documents too, the Third Reich passports my mother had saved and family photographs of long gone relatives. I studied these artifacts with the intensity of a stargazer on a moonless night, when the eyes focus on one sidereal point, inks over the other billions and trillions of distant sparkles. As I sifted through the papers and peeled away layers to reveal the past, I wished like hell I'd asked my mother more questions about her childhood, her family, and her immigration experience when she was alive. But it turned out that she'd left me clues to follow. Almost from the beginning, my search felt like a seance, a conversation she and I never had when she was alive, a collaboration with a ghost. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Julie.
Thank you.
And what are you next up to?
Well, I spent a lot of time researching this time period, and when I was finished with this book, I decided I wasn't quite done yet, and I am actually working on a novel now. Part of it is set during that same time, but it's an invented story based on research that I've done. And then, of course, as novels do, it seems to be going its own way, and I'm just trying to keep up. So that's where I am.
Nice, nice.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. It's really been a pleasure, really. Yeah.
Next up, I'd like to introduce Sufiya Abdur-Rahman, who's the author of the memoir Heir to the Crescent Moon, winner of the Iowa Prize for Literary Nonfiction. She is also creative nonfiction editor for Cherry Tree, a national literary journal at Washington College, where she teaches creative writing and journalism. She lives in Annapolis, Maryland with her family. Welcome, Sufiya.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for having me. And thank you, Julie and Ian, for such beautiful reads. Lovely to follow you. I'm going to be reading today from my memoir, which came out on Monday. It's called Heir to the Crescent Moon. It is the story of a second-generation African-American Muslim grappling with her childhood, trying to find out where she fits with that legacy, and also discovering the history of her parents' conversion story. So for today, I'm actually going to read a chapter that is before my mother decided to convert to Islam. The book is primarily focused on my relationship with my father and his story, but this chapter, I think, has some echoes to Julie's as well. And I hope that you enjoy it. Right. It's from chapter 26 called Her Own Way. At Banu Halal Herbal Tea Room, my mother could sit down after her classes at City College, where she was a freshman in 1972, drink a cup of tea, eat a piece of gingerbread, and feel as if transported to a Muslim land. Brothers with scraggly beards and thigh-skimming thaubs sat at the tables around her, sipping their own tea, reading Quran, and chewing on miswak sticks. The aroma of incense wafted through the air, jazz music played in the background, Arabic phrases sprung from conversation. She enjoyed almost everything about being there. Her favorite, though, was lounging at a table with a cup of tea centered before her and a plate with pastry set off to her right. She'd breathe in the flowery fragrances rising from the glass as she sipped, then try to guess the ingredients of the slice of cake or bread she bit into, carefully savoring each morsel as she chewed. My mother had loved baking ever since she was a girl, standing by her mother's apron side, watching her mix flour, sugar, butter, and waiting for a little batter to put in her own easy bake oven. The tea room brought this to mind. When she was there, she could also drift up to the storefront to admire handmade clothes adorning the glass display case. Her eyes examined the intricate patterns that multicolored yarns formed on kufis. Beside them, she studied men's chemises, long, sleek, and just as elegant. With a good look, my mother could tell if the stitchwork on each kufi would keep its form after wear, and whether the cut of each chemise formed the proper symmetry. She'd been sewing for years, first making clothes for her dolls on a toy machine with swatches her grandmother brought home from her job at a dressmaking factory, then moving on to the old sewing machine her father bought and showed her how to thread and operate to make clothes for herself. Lately, she'd begun asking for more yards of fabric as the outfits she made had become longer and looser. Inspecting the pieces at the tea room made her ponder her singer and what Muslim-inspired garb she might try to sew next. Yes, she liked the tea room, except that when Salahuddin, her boyfriend since high school, asked her to accompany him there to listen to lectures about Islam, his new religion, she refused. Just because he went to the tea room didn't mean that she had to go with him, she said. It was the same thing she told him about becoming Muslim, which he'd done and told her she should too. I don't need to take Shahada because you took Shahada, she countered. If she wanted to, she said, she'd become Muslim in her own way, in her own time. My mother was born Joanna Taylor in December 1954, the fourth and last child of her father, Wade Hampton Taylor Sr., an MTA subway conductor, and her mother, Vivian Wheeler Taylor, a New York City rent examiner. She was their only daughter. She was raised in the working class Millbrook houses of the South Bronx, where in 1958, when they moved there, she and her family were among the new housing project's first occupants. My mother, Jody, as she was called, was always under the watch of her three older brothers, Wade Jr., Kenny, and John. They took her to Sunday school, Wade and Kenny even teaching it for a while, and my mother sat rapt, listening to the lessons about God, Jesus, and spirituality. It seemed that every other day of her week was a lesson not in religion, but in how to be a proper young lady. Saturdays were for long drives to Yonkers for its better supermarket prices with her father behind the wheel, or for subway rides downtown to Gimbel's department store with her mother seated beside her. For the subway, her mother forced her to put on a dress. But Mom, she complained, dreading the fitted waist and fluffy skirt of the frock awaiting her. Why do I have to wear a dress just to get on the subway? You always have to look presentable, Jody, her mother said, because people are always watching you. And sure enough, as they trawled Gimbel's hosiery department, a salesperson eyed their movements. My grandmother, easily 5'10", wearing a size 11W pump, a 16 dress, with a full shapely figure, a complexion like rich fertile earth, and the airs of a duchess, was hard to miss. Can I help you? The salesperson asked. Oh, we're just looking, my grandmother responded kindly. She knew just what she wanted and where to find them. Round-the-clock nylons were her favorite. She wore them, along with a dress, sometimes a jacket, a set of clip-on earrings, often a matching necklace, a pair of pumps, some leather, some patent leather, some with a buckle, and others with a flower, but always pumps, and a complimentary purse every day to her job at the Bronx Borough Rent Office, where she dealt with landlord-tenant disputes. Round-the-clock nylons came in her color and were guaranteed to fit. This is a good price, Jody, my grandmother said, taking note of the sale. I better stock up. She bought a dozen pairs of pantyhose that day, leaving no chance to be unprepared if she happened to one day get a run. This propriety and exacting sense of style was the same that my grandmother demanded of my mother. Every morning while she got dressed for school, my mother came to anticipate the moment her mother would stick her head in her bedroom door, examine her outfit, and ask in an accusatory tone, "Is that what you're wearing?" It always annoyed her. Her biweekly hair appointments at Miss Luline's, however, did not. The cigarette-smoking, wig-wearing, heavy-handed Miss Luline was initially her grandmother's hairdresser, then her mother's, and eventually Miss Holland, an older hairdresser in the shop, known for her gentler touch, became hers. My mother's grandmother wore her rapidly graying hair short. That way, there was not much mussing and fussing to worry about each day as she worked as a domestic. Before moving to New York, my mother's Nana had cooked, cleaned, and minded the children of a white family in Flanders, New Jersey. Nana's mother and grandmother actually did too. The three of them lived in a house that the white family had built for them on its property and swapped them out to do the domestic work like a human Newton's cradle. My grandmother and great aunt grew up there, befriending white children and baffling them with their differences. At 6 or 7 years old, the daughter of the white family my mother's Nana cooked and cleaned for became so enamored with my grandmother that the little girl thought she'd do her a favor. After the two had played together all day, when bath time came, the girl naively asked her father, "Could you please scrub the black off of Vivian?" "My dear, that is the color of her skin. It will not come off," her father explained, and the little girl wailed, dismayed that there was no way to make her beloved Black friend white. My grandmother and her sister integrated Flanders' otherwise white elementary school in the early 1930s, although at their mother's insistence, they left town before high school when she expected the allure of curious white boys to become too great. The lessons my grandmother learned there about how to carry herself among whites, how to speak, how to dress as one of only a pair of representatives of the entire Black race, stuck with her. And so when she went to Miss Luline's, she got her dark hair that she never let grow beyond the nape of her neck perfectly coiffed into big layered curls that framed her face. She wore it this way always. She even had a wig in the same style to wear on vacations when she couldn't get in to see Miss Luline. Like everything else, my grandmother was meticulous about her hair and would not allow anyone to catch her looking unkempt. She felt she couldn't afford to. At first, my mother took it as a point of pride that she was grown enough to go to a beauty parlor. Every other week while she was in junior high, she took the bus to Miss Luline's to have her hair pressed and curled. And when she started high school in 1968, and her family moved out of the projects and into a 3-bedroom co-op apartment near the Bronx's Grand Concourse, less than a mile away from Miss Luline's, her biweekly visits continued. Around the same time, though, my mother and her best friend Denise, together in their new teenage independence, began exploring a world that was changing all around them. Just before high school, Martin Luther King Jr. and Bobby Kennedy had been assassinated. By freshman year, more than 500,000 US troops were in Vietnam, and my mother's 2 oldest brothers, Wade and Kenny, were elsewhere overseas, having been drafted into the military. My mother and Denise began buying Black books from the Tree of Life bookstore on 125th Street and Lenox Avenue to teach themselves the things they knew their schools would not. They shunned lessons on Shakespeare in favor of writing and performing their own revolutionary poetry. They raised their fists in Black Power salutes. They bought Angela Davis posters and red, black, and green buttons. And my mother began dating a Black revolutionary in training named Nate, whose afro was as round and planetary as a globe, revolving her entire world on its axis. Despite my grandmother's attempts to raise my mother in a bubble of prim propriety, everything about her environment, from public school days in the gritty and in parts poverty-stricken Bronx, to family trips into the still segregated South, then north into Canada, which had been a bastion of Black freedom for years, reflected the truth of her times. My mother, at 15 years old, felt that her neatly pressed and curled hairstyle no longer did. "Here you go, Jody," her mother said one beauty parlor weekend in 1970, handing her some money. "Give that to Miss Luline." My mother closed her fingers around the dollars and stuffed them into her purse. Then she and Denise, instead of boarding the bus to Miss Luline's, took the subway to the 135th Street YMCA, walked into the first floor barbershop and said, "We want to get afros." My mother leaned back in the shampoo chair and let water wash the effects of a biweekly straightening comb out of her tresses. She sat up and suffered through a blow dryer, tugging height and width into her locks, and finally settled into the barber's chair as he trimmed roundness and revolution about her head. When it was done, she looked in the mirror and saw that her afro rivaled the size and shape of her boyfriend Nate's. She walked out of the Y and into the Harlem streets, where her afro became just one of many, and finally thought that she looked how she felt inside. My mother arrived home to her mother with a self-satisfied look on her face, new loose curls encircling her head, and the money my grandmother had given her to pay Miss Luline still in her purse. She had saved her own money to get the afro. She took out the bills and approached my grandmother. "Here, Ma, thank you," she said, placing the dollars in her mother's hand. My grandmother took the money, but said nothing. She simply stared at my mother's hair, dumbfounded and insulted, as if a strange man had walked up to her on the street and kissed her full on the lips. Suddenly realizing what had just happened, my grandmother stiffened the hand not holding the bills and slapped my mother clear across her face. "Why did you do it? Why did you do it?" she screamed. My mother, feeling the sting of the slap along with her mother's profound disappointment, cried. Tears snuck from my grandmother's eyes too. To her, my mother's afro was like getting 100 runs in her favorite pantyhose, making a dozen trips downtown wearing dungarees, like my mother being caught 1,000 times in the wrong outfit at school. My grandmother saw that the armor of propriety she tried to shield my mother's blackness with was completely off, making her vulnerable. She couldn't stand it. "If you wanted an afro, I would have bought you an afro wig," she said with voice quaking. The proposition seemed silly to my mother even then. Her world was becoming more volatile by the day. Following King and Kennedy's assassinations, there was a rash of violence involving and against the Black Panthers that left several young Black people dead. During her sophomore year, 4 Kent State University students had been shot and killed during a protest. She, like many others, was reading the autobiography of Malcolm X, and the impact of his life and his murder was a phenomenon she was still trying to comprehend. There was real danger and what appeared to be real revolution all around her. What would she have looked like with a fake afro? She thought her mother didn't understand or didn't care to. "Joanna, you are to take yourself back to Miss Luline's and have that thing washed out and your hair pressed and curled," my grandmother said. "No daughter of mine will walk around looking like a target." My grandfather, who had been quietly standing by, suddenly piped up. "Oh, I think it looks nice," he said, with the gentle sway of the tobacco leaf fields he left in Douglas, Georgia, still evident in his southern lilt, decades after he boarded a train to New York City for more opportunity and more freedoms. "Yeah, it looks good," echoed her brothers. But my grandmother's mind was made up, and she clearly was the one in charge. Pressed and curled, do you understand? Miss Luline's was already closed by then, but the next day, my mother knew she would have to go. "Yes, Mom," she answered. And my mother felt her flirtation with teenage rebellion wilt under her mother's pressure, just as her afro would the next day under the heat of Miss Luline's straightening comb. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophia. Sophia, are you working on something new at the moment?
Yes, I'm working on an essay collection right now. I'm hoping to link some essays under the theme of love of Black men. It's kind of all over the place right now because the love is sometimes a struggle, sometimes a joy, and it's portrayed different ways in media and film. So I'm writing about all of that.
Very interesting. Do you have any piece coming out soon that we can check out?
Not right now. I'm still in the writing phase right now.
Okay. Well, good luck with all that.
but you for sure can get the book.
Oh,
You for
oh,
sure
we
can
will.
get right to the Crescent Moon. Thank you. I'll put a link in the chat when I have a chance.
Thank you, Sophia. Great reading.
Thank you.
And so next up we have Clifford Garstang, who's the author of 2 novels, Oliver's Travels and The Shaman of Turtle Valley, and a novel in stories, What the Zhang Boys Know, winner of the Library of Virginia Literary Award for Fiction, and 2 short story collections, House of the Ancients and Other Stories, and In an Uncharted Country. Clifford is also the editor of Everywhere Stories, short fiction from a small planet, a 3-volume anthology of stories set around the world. Clifford's work has appeared in Bellevue Literary Review, Blackbird, Cream City Review, Hopkins Review, Los Angeles Review, Tampa Review, and many other places. He's received distinguished mention in the Best American Series. He's also widely known for his annual ranking of literary magazines, which I have actually tapped into occasionally. Thank you for that, Clifford. A former Peace Corps volunteer, an international lawyer, Clifford earned an MFA in fiction from Queen's University of Charlotte. He lives near Staunton, Virginia. You can find him on www.cliffordgarstang.com. Welcome, Clifford.
Thank you very much, Mark. Thanks everyone for being here, and thanks to Sophia and Ian and Julia for those wonderful readings. It's a real pleasure to be here. I'm going to read from my new novel, which came out in May, Oliver's Travels. It focuses on a character named Ali Tucker, who is a recent college graduate. He, like a lot of recent college graduates, he doesn't have a very firm grasp on who he is or who he wants to be. But he's managed to land a teaching job, and he also fancies himself as a possible writer, especially because he has found a way to live vicariously through a character who he has named Oliver. And he's written a number of short stories about Oliver, which he calls Oliver's Travels. So there's a bit of a metafictional element to the book. The main thrust of the story, though, is that Ali has a fuzzy memory of childhood trauma that he can't quite bring into focus. He knows that something happened to him, but he doesn't know what it is. When he comes home from college, he is with his divorced father at first and goes through some photo albums and finds a photograph of someone he doesn't recognize, but his father tells him that's his Uncle Scotty. And his father tells him that Uncle Scotty is dead. But this begins to prompt some memories that Ali has had. And so and eventually he's going to go on a journey around the world, starting in Singapore, where I used to live, to look for Uncle Scotty. The book is in a lot of fragments. And so I'm going to read 4 relatively short fragments that begin to paint the picture. After my father's gone to bed, I pull out the album again and look at the picture of Scotty. Dead? I don't believe it. How could I not remember Scotty's death? They would have told us. Scotty, the adventurer, died while climbing Everest or surfing in Bali, gored by a rhino in Tanzania. There would have been a funeral, right? An obituary? I guess I was young, but surely I'd remember that. There would have been anguish and mourning, and then there would have been stories told about him at subsequent family gatherings. Remember the time when Scotty always loved this song, and what a shame Scotty isn't here to enjoy this. Thinking of him now, an image comes to me. Uncle Scotty playing basketball in the driveway with my brother Q. I'm too little, barely able to hold the ball in my pudgy arms, but I watch. When he jumps for a rebound, arms outstretched, he soars. Like Superman, I thought then, like a gazelle, I think now. And then another image. At the lake where we took summer vacations, my father's idea of travel being the long drive to a rented cabin in Minnesota. I'm wearing an orange life vest, a mere puppy waddling on the dock, crying for the greater adventure of water. Q wades in the reedy shallows, hunting minnows and crawdads, but Scotty swims out into deeper, darker water and back with bold strokes, powering through the chilly lake, then emerging, leaping onto the shore like a mythological being. That's Scotty, a superhero who went off to conquer the world, leaving us all behind. Could I have been mistaken all this time? Did they tell me he was dead and I somehow got it wrong? Did I forget? So the book has a lot of flashbacks to his college years. He was a philosophy major at a small college. And so we see a number of scenes with his mentor, Professor Russell. After our classroom discussion of consciousness, I visited Professor Russell in his office, wanting to know more. He pointed to the chair across from his desk. I sat, and my gaze took in the towering bookshelf behind him. Hegel, Schopenhauer, Heir, all the philosophers we were reading in our classes. Kant, Hume, Husserl. Did you have a question, Ollie? I laughed because for a moment I'd forgotten why I'd come, and I was startled to hear him speak my name. But now I looked at him. Right, I was wondering, is it possible to alter consciousness? That depends on what you mean. He fiddled with the knot of his skinny tie, and I thought my question had made him nervous. I guess what I want to know is, does consciousness include awareness of the past? There was that dream I'd had all my life, the memory that didn't make sense. Had something happened to me? Who belonged to that face? Like, is there a way to recover lost memories? Maybe, he said. We'd wandered far from the point he'd made in class, and he was clearly hesitant to continue. How? It wasn't like me to be pushy, but I needed to know. He twisted in his chair, slowly, reluctantly, and pulled a book from the shelf behind him, sliding it across the desk to me. Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind by Suzuki. I knew something about Buddhism, of course. I'd read Siddhartha in high school like everyone else, and my comparative religions class had covered the basics of the different branches, Hinayana, Mahayana, and various schools within them like Zen, and that's about all I remembered. Meditation, I asked, doubtful. Isn't that just sitting and thinking? He laughed. Not exactly, Ollie, more like not thinking. Puzzled, I nudged the book back toward him. There isn't another way? His eyes were burning through me, and I wondered what nerve I'd struck. Had I broken some rule of student-teacher etiquette? Just then, commotion broke out in the hall outside his office. A couple of boisterous students, what sounded like an argument, playful shouting, but it showed no signs of abating. He got up, closed the door, and returned to his seat. There might be other ways, he said. Was I supposed to understand what he was talking about without him saying the words? Because I didn't. My face must have given me away. There are, he began, looking over his shoulder as if to be sure we were still alone, pharmaceutical options. You mean drugs? Keep your voice down, his expression begged. Drugs? I repeated, almost whispering. He shrugged as if giving in to the inevitable, now that the topic had been broached. Still, I could see that he weighed how much to tell me. Psilocybin, LSD, peyote, he said. He turned back to his bookshelf and pulled down another volume, this one worn and dog-eared, The Teachings of Don Juan by Carlos Castaneda. I'd heard of Castaneda, but hadn't seen his books. I opened it, flipped through the dog-eared pages, and began reading about a drug-induced trance. Now I understood his hesitancy. I looked at Professor Russell, probably with a mix of shock and admiration. Does it work? I asked. He reached across the desk, took back both books, and shelved them. He returned his burning gaze to me and said, yes. And this is a bit of another flashback. The dream has come to me from time to time over the years, and now it's back. The face I see in the dream is indistinct, more shadow than snapshot, and I don't know who it is. Sometimes I think it must be my grandmother, who, when she lived with us, occasionally came into my bedroom at night to check on me, to convince herself that I was still breathing. The face could be hers, but now, because of the note I found from Uncle Scotty, because of that picture I saw at Dad's, I have an idea that the face belongs to him. The nose, the chin, the soft eyes. Is it Scotty's face in the dream, or maybe it isn't a dream at all, a memory? Uncle Scotty owned a tiny car, a Corvair, a Carmen Ghia. I was too young to distinguish. Whatever it was, it had been my grandfather's, passed to Scotty when the old man's stroke confined him to bed. Or Uncle Scotty had saved for it, working summers at the country club as a caddy, or a lifeguard, or I have all these different memories, stories I was told, different versions of the same story. They can't all be true, can they? He comes back to me in bursts, like film clips. We went for rides in that car, radio blasting rock and roll, coasting down steep southern Indiana hills, long straightaways where Uncle Scotty's hands flew free, raised in surrender to gravity, laughter howling behind us like exhaust. Is this my memory or my imagination? It seems so very vivid, more than a movie playing in my head. I can feel the wind in my eyes, hear the laughter, smell the new mown hay. He was athletic, I think, musical. I remember a thin voice singing along with the radio. I remember a guitar he played for us sometimes. And I remember delicate fingers that spread like a spider's legs, as light to the touch. Touch? I remember his touch on my leg, my arm, my back. Is it Scotty's touch? Is that the dream? Then he went away. He was gone. The car, the music, the laughter, gone. Here's my question, something Professor Russell was never able to answer, at least not in a way that made sense to me. What is memory? Is it energy? Does it have an existence apart from the body, apart from consciousness? When we forget something, where does that memory go? And how can memory be fallible? If we remember it, how can it be false unless it is deliberately fabricated? And a related question. On the one hand, I cannot observe a past event, and therefore I have no valid reason to believe it occurred, even if I think I remember it. I cannot be certain that it happened. The past, it seems to me, like the future, isn't real, and yet our senses retain impressions of past events, images, sounds, tastes that cannot consciously be altered. Are not these impressions evidence of the past event? If consciousness survives us, does memory persist in the void? Do our memories live on? If I remember it, didn't it happen? And if I don't remember, could it have happened anyway? What did Uncle Scotty do? Why can't I remember? And one last short piece. It's time to begin my search. I open my laptop, summon the great god Google, and type Scott Tucker in the search box. Results, 58,700,000 hits. I'll never find him. Adding Indiana to the search narrows it down to fewer than 1 million hits, but still. I try every combination. I search various other family members' names, estimate when Scotty would have been born, and narrow the search that way. I add the high school he probably went to, something we share, but I get nothing. Too much to be helpful. If he's dead, as my father claims, where's the obituary? If he's not, there must be a trace of him. I need specifics, date and place of birth, full name, all that. why won't my parents talk about him? Thank you.
Thank you, Cliff. What are you up to next, Cliff?
I have been working for a number of years on a new novel. It is a blended historical and contemporary story that takes place in Singapore, which I mentioned I used to live there. It's been tricky because of the blended aspect of it. So it's about an American lawyer who moves to Singapore, but becomes very engaged with some artwork that he discovers that was created in the early part of the 20th century. And so we get the story of the artist from the 19-teens, and then also the contemporary story.
Interesting. When do you have a publisher for that already, or is that still just in progress?
It's still just in progress. I noticed that Julie mentioned that she is a fellow of the Virginia Center for Creative Arts. I'm actually going there next week for a few weeks and hope to finish it while I'm there. And we'll see about agents and publishers after that.
Wonderful, wonderful. Tell us about your literary rankings, by the way. As I said, I've dipped into those a couple of times. How did that come about?
Well, about 15 years ago, I was trying to figure out where to send my own short stories. I had been in an MFA program, but it didn't really teach us how to get published, just how to write. And so I began looking at the Pushcart Prize anthologies as a proxy for quality of literary magazines, because I wanted to create a tiered system. So I wouldn't be sending to the New Yorker and then some unknown magazine at the same time. I wanted to have an idea of who were the best magazines. So I created this list for myself, and I told friends about it, and they wanted to see it. So I started posting the fiction list on my website. I did that for a couple of years, and then added the poetry and nonfiction rankings as separate lists. And they are all based on the Pushcart Prize. I have a formula that I use that takes into account 10 years worth on a rolling basis of both Pushcart Prizes and special mentions in the anthology. So each list, fiction, poetry, and nonfiction, has about 250 journals on it with links to those journals so that people can follow up and find the ones they like.
Nice. Well, thank you for that service, and hopefully you'll continue it, Cliff. Well, thank you everybody today. This has been an incredible show, starting with Ian Seed from the UK. Sorry to have to stay up so late, but thanks for being with us. Julie Metz, Sufiya Abdur-Rahman, and Clifford Garstang, who was just with us. And at this stage, I'm going to hand it over to one of my co-hosts to take over the open mic part of the show.
That's me, because Jonathan's still waiting for a parcel. We have a really quick but brilliant open mic with a few of our favorites. And the brilliant Mike Folds is going to kick us off from his basement, which we believe is in another dimension. Mike, please read something amazing for us.
You should be able to unmute yourself now.
I was going to say, I thought I would be last, and all those acts are going to be very difficult to follow.
I knew you could take it. I have faith in you.
They were terrific. This is a three-part poem that I finished recently, and it's called A Light That Heals. By the way, Clifford, I ran a magazine called Ragazine for around 15 years. I don't know if you ever ran across that, but it was kind of a mix of poetry, art, and I guess social thinking or writing. And it was a nonprofit. We had some very interesting, I think, contributors. And if you have a chance, I don't think it'll make the listing because it's defunct, but have a look sometime. There are some remnants online. Not enough, I'm
Read the
afraid.
poem.
Excuse me? Read a poem?
No, yeah.
Oh, get on with it. Okay. It's called The Light That Heals. For some reason, I seek to remain involved. I listen. When no one speaks, I call and listen to the echo. In the forest, I am cold and alone, alone with a voice in the ear. So it is that someone is always near. Part 2. We who live in our towers delight in the shore that beats with our hearts. That we look at the person sliding right and left and do nothing breaks us apart. Yet the passage listens as the road splits. The valley owns two dissonant sides. How to explain that to the children requires the voice of another tongue. 3. Now she is dying. Now she is down for the count. Now she is giving up and placing her weapons on the floor. Now she is sliding from the bedroom to the door, where a light that heals and blends the future and the past as the circumference of the ball. On the playing field, we kick it away. Thank you.
That was beautiful. How could you not think that you could follow the leads? I think that was
It's easy
beautiful.
to not think that.
No, I think it was
Thank you
great. I
very
love,
much.
yet the passage listens as the road splits. So many beautiful lines. Mike, fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to ask Sarah next. Feel free to heckle her though, Mike.
I'm going to. Sarah, I think
Do it.
I know you from way back when.
We've never
Name is
met, but you published a
familiar.
story of mine.
There you go. There is a connection.
Yes.
And
So
Sarah, I remember your amazing pigeon poem from so that was my first introduction to you, Sarah. So please, let's hear another one from you.
okay, I'm going to read a prose poem since that was the first poet read prose poems. And
Prose poems are the best poems. I'm just gonna say that.
oh yes, thank you. Already I'm getting harassed. So I feel like this needs an explanation, but you're all very smart. And okay, it starts with a quotation from Julian Bond. Wrote this kind of amazing article, and it was a newspaper article. And the quotation is, and I have wondered from that day to this why he did it. And he's referring to one of the characters in here. And Julian Bond and Taylor Branch were the first delegates from Georgia, first Black delegates from Georgia to the Democratic Convention, the big one where there was all the riffraff. Okay, I like riffraff. The great mute who is almighty. And I have wondered from that day to this why he did it, Julian Bond. One morning, you head to the McDonald's near 150th, knowing when you order a $1 coffee, the server will ask what size, and you'll think small, then change to large, because a $1 coffee at McDonald's is any size you want. The young man will let you know he doesn't want to serve you. It'll make sense. You'll move on to Immaculate Conception and a large church, and the serenity of something started long ago. When the almighty mute gets it right, she gets it right, but mostly by way of architecture. You admire her for still bothering to exist and suggest it's time she make good. Say for the kid at McDonald's who took your order, one coffee, one cream, and held you responsible, which you are, not really, but really you are. Julian Bond and Taylor Branch were in Georgia's first Black delegation to the Democratic Convention. They couldn't make costs until a chance meeting and the Honorable Elijah Muhammad giving them $3,000 cash. He literally changed the face of the American possible. Separatist is just a word. Do or don't credit the great mute who is almighty, but take as an article of faith that when the machine is pushed and pushed to move, maybe by the clear-eyed kid at McDonald's, it's sometimes up and moves.
Thank you so much. Next, we will go to the weird and wonderful inside the head of John Wessex, who always entertains us with his slightly surreal kind of view of the world and wombats. So, John, please astound us again this week.
Okay. Outside the Vatican, a gelato shop, children smiling, rainbows of delight. You forget train schedules, that bank heist in Brooklyn. There's only bird song, cool mist from the fountain. Suddenly the Pope welcomes you into the Holy See. You look around, he can't be pointing at you, you're not even Catholic. But his hand is there, tugging your shoulder. Come, come, everyone is waiting. Inside, a klezmer band dancing, ayatollahs, beards flailing, grand muftis, pillbox hats bobbing, Hindus mambo, Taoists salsa, the Eastern Orthodox patriarch mazurkas, his black robe twirling, the Dalai Lama does the Macarena, chuckling at his missteps. Who knew Methodists could shake their hips or that shamans in reindeer hide could tango? You join the dance, pause only for honeyed wine. Long after midnight, your host escorts you to the gate. Doors always open, come back anytime. So you do, but a receptionist with two left feet says, the Pope's in a meeting, asks, are you even Catholic? Two Swiss guards grab your arms, drag you out past cardinals and archbishops. No matter, there's a golden Buddha in the sherbet. Cars' horns play clarinet. Flowers dance ecstasy in the wind.
You never disappoint. I think you should narrate my life. I love your delivery as well. It's like something mysterious is going to happen. And of course, the Pope is back. So, I mean, we could get Ian to sing for us again, but we might.
Well, you're talking about the Pope or the new Pope?
The Pope. The Pope. Isn't there just the one Pope?
No, there's the Pope, the new Pope, and the newest Pope.
Oh, okay. I'll have to work that one out. I think there's a pious there somewhere, isn't there? I mean, I grew up Catholic. We have one left though, Mark. We have one. Lucky last. DeWitt and his chair are going to round out the
So we're going to hear DeWitt's chair then.
You never know. With DeWitt, you can never tell.
Well,
DeWitt,
we're talking about. Can you hear
read
me?
for us. Yeah.
Okay. So we're talking about memory and memoir. This is called On Scars. 3 inches under my jaw, right side, where at age 5, I had surgery, my sister remembers, for an infected lymph node. 1 inch, left hand, between little and ring fingers, where I got cleated in high school football. 4 inches, left elbow, from fixing a barbed wire fence on a ranch before college. 35 years of running ended in a bad fall from a curb. Surgery for bilateral complete quad tendon rupture and 8 inches on both knees. But nothing in my life equals my father's scar. As a teen, he'd had osteomyelitis in his left femur. A groove of infected marrow had been taken, leaving his leg permanently weakened and a deep crevice, hip to knee, where folds of the incision had grown into the bone. He limped. He fell away on his right leg with his golf swing. He rarely went swimming. I was squeamish at the sight, and when, age 7, I ran for his protection from thunder and lightning, and he welcomed me into his bed. I was afraid somehow of bumping against or falling into the scar. I have my invisible ones: disappointed heart, failures, faults, betrayals of myself and others, stupidities and shame, losses of loved ones, but nothing like my father's breakdown before I was born, his alcoholic bad times, which left him odd, brooding, and beholden to my mother. She stuck with me through it all, he marveled. The one time he told me his version. Most women wouldn't have. She's one woman in 1,000. Are scars the proof of wounds or of healing? Tribal scars, I called my memoir after his death. But a friend warned me that no one would buy a book with scars in its title. So I decided on Sweet Dreams.
That was beautiful. I love how you write about family and mementos and all kinds of keepsakes, and scars are kind of one of those too. Thank you. That was lovely. A great way to end the amazing readings today. And Mark, are you going to update us with the program for the next month, I think?
Oh, certainly, certainly. So, well, first of all, thank you once again to Ian Seed, Julie Metz, Sufiya Abdur-Rahman, and Clifford Garstang for a wonderful feature reading tonight. And thank you, open micers. That was quite a show. And so next up, we shall be seeing the launch of Spoke 8 Boston Journal with readings by Clark Coolidge, Wong Ping, and Helen Ivory, and myself. I'm in that issue, and it's on December 11. And December 26, we have a founders reading with featured special guests. January 15, we have a special feature on the life and work of the poet and novelist Michael Anania, featuring such luminaries as Nathaniel Mackey, Reginald Gibbons, John Mathias, Jeffrey Allen, Mary Bidinger. So we hope you'll join us for those. We're taking a little bit of a break now because I myself have to go into surgery, unfortunately, and hopefully it will be a quick process. I know Jonathan has got all sorts of things to deal with his new house he's moved into. And so, yeah, we've decided we need a little respite, but that doesn't mean we won't be back. We will. To end tonight, I just like to read a very short prose poem of mine called Unhand Me You Cad. That secret life passed by, lit by clouds. You woke up again, stirred in your fiery pillars, crossed land to edge land with those innocent eyes. Somewhere in the knees, I felt it when you saw the city lights from the hills. As you descended into the dark, your cool hands pressed together. That is my tree, you said, purring. I want to be a tree like that, I said, whirling in my dizzy head. That night, the great snows descended, here where the crossroads meet. The clouds became one, and a white light burst across the sky. I was like a lump of clay in the road. You were like a peacock, preening, but half petrified in fear. Hold me fast, you said. The great telescope on the other side of the earth runs through all waveforms of light, only to come out here. In a fit of fury, we left the city on the first bus out of town. We hit a neon sign on the outskirts which read, "Get your mixed metaphors here." So thank you, everybody, for a wonderful show. And we'll see you next time on the other side. Love poetry and keep well. Thank you all. Good
Love
night.
poetry and pebbles, everyone.
Good night.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody. Rion, you missed it.